Okay, welcome everybody. This is a special day for us. It's always a special day to be with this young lady over here. And let me introduce myself. I'm Wes Gottlock. This is my wife, Barbara. And we have been involved with Bannerman Island since we began the public tours back in 2004. And when we first saw Bannerman Island, we moved across the river and we were just like awestruck when we took that tour. And ever since then, it's been a love affair, led by Neil Kaplan, who's the executive director sitting over there. Neil will say a few words later. And ever since that time, Barb and I became tour guides and coordinators of tours and board of directors and what have you. And we're still flinging away over there as much as we can. But this book came about, the Eleanor book, because Eleanor, God bless her, she'll tell you her story in her own words, but she was pretty much raised on the island from 1932 to 1943. And she donated to the trust her memoirs about 6 or 7 years ago, and my wife and I decided to convert it into a book. Take some of those memoirs and convert it into a fictional, realistic history book, and I think it really came out quite well. But be that as it may, we'll begin the talk today. We're going to give you about a 30-minute backdrop on Bannerman's Island, history of it. It goes back 10,000 years, but if you don't want to hear all 10,000 years. It was created actually 10,000 years ago by during the last ice age. Native Americans had very little use for the island because there's no fresh food source on the island, no fresh water source, so they kind of shied away from the island. But they did make stopovers, we believe, for other reasons, but they did not choose to live on the island. Dutch settlers took an interest in the island starting in 1607, led by Henry Hudson, when his boat started coming up the river. And the name Palapel is really the name of the island. It's not Bannerman's Island, but everybody familiarly calls it Bannerman's Island. I'm not going to get into the derivation of it because we're trying to compress all of the history together in one swoop today. But the Dutch people had a big presence on the island. They owned the island for about 175 years, a series of Dutch families moving the Native American Wappingers tribes, the Lenni-Lenape tribes, further north and further west and east. And that's the way it went back then, okay? They held the deed to the island for many, many years. During that time, they never built on the island because it was solid rock, had very little greenery on it. How many of you have ever been to Bannerman's Island? Oh, wow, that's pretty good. Almost half, so the other half are going to come out the last week, next week, Neil, right? We have a few seats left. Okay. Yeah, come back if in spring and do take a tour. So Native Americans gone, Dutch families move in. During that period of time, they don't build on the island, they hold the deeds to the property, and miscreants come out to the island, right? Illegal drinking, trading of tobacco and alcohol on the island. It catches the attention of a woman named Mary Taft in 1888, who was a rather conservative Presbyterian teetotaling lady who lived in Cornwall, right across the river. And she decided she didn't like all of this nonsense going on, the vices on the island. So she purchased the island in 1888 with the sole intention of not living there either, but to getting all of this riffraff off the island, and she does so successfully. So she holds the property in 1888. Still, hardly a tree on the island, a shred of greenery, and what have you. Well, a man in 1899 comes along by the name of Francis Bannerman VI, who is a Scottish native. He was born in Dundee, Scotland in 1851. And at the age of 3, he came to this country with his family, and they settled eventually in the Brooklyn Navy Yard area. And when little Francis was 10 years old, his father told him, "Son, you're now the breadwinner for the family because I have to fight in the Civil War down south." So at the ages of 10, 11, 12, and into his 13th year, little Francis Bannerman is fending for the family with a series of odd jobs. And one of the oddest jobs was in the evening when he would take his beaten-up old rowboat into the Brooklyn Navy Yard harbor, pulling up scrap with a grappling hook, because the ships were coming in and out of Europe at a rapid pace, and they threw off those chains and those ropes for further use, for recycling purposes, actually. So Francis Bannerman brought in the ropes to these guys, gets his little cut. He's the middleman in this operation. When he's 13 and a half, his father comes home from the war, and he is so impressed with Francis that he lets him go back to school, but they actually develop a business relationship together. They invest in rather small businesses at first, chandlery, produce, and the like. But finally, Dad gets the notion to start going to Army and Navy auctions at the end of wars, beginning with the Civil War, and buy bulk items that is up for sale after the war. This occurred back in the day when it was perfectly legal to walk home with a cannonball in your pocket. Swords and scabbards, guns, rifles, uniforms, canteens, knapsacks. The Bannermans began buying it in huge quantities and beginning storage of them all in New York City. Well, after a while, and I'm skipping ahead years and years and years, in 1884, Francis Bannerman, after his father passed away in 1872, puts out a catalog that goes around the world. He's now selling internationally. The catalog begins in 1884 with about 8 pages in it, and by the turn of the century, 20th century, it is exceeding of 400 pages per year, sometimes exceeding the Sears and J.C. Penney catalogs in thickness. The catalogs today are very collectibles, and you will see just one page of one of these catalogs on the screen today. And Bob, you want to take this over, or you want to? Oh, I'll do it. Okay. Again, selling everything that you can think of that might supply a military country, with their uniforms, with their guns, with their scabbards and swords, their saddles and their knapsacks and the canteens and medical supplies, flags, buttons, and you name it. There's some interesting items on this one particular page. You might be able to see the reindeer skin coats with hoods, a land grant that is signed by Patrick Henry, and way down at the bottom, 5,000 pounds of pemmican prepared meat, which I believe were like field rations. I believe they were Spam. You remember old canned Spam that they used in the wartime, okay? So this elevates Bannerman's business now even further, and by the turn of the century, the New York Times actually cites him as being a multimillionaire. He has become the world's leading purveyor of used military goods, probably in the history of this country and possibly in the history of the world. Innovating Army and Navy stores, also giving credit for that as well. Okay. Well, he's looking for a place in 1899 because New York City is kind of leaning on him to take his business out of New York City because of the stuff he's harboring there, black powder items, in growing neighborhoods where he's storing some of this material. So he comes up on the river in 1899 with his wife Helen, and they spot the island, Palapel Island, and he decides, wow, this might be interesting. Maybe I can get out of New York City's hair and bring all of my material up here in a safe harbor. So he meets that Mary Taft from across the river I told you about before, and he makes a deal with Mary Taft, and they sign a deed for $1,600 for the 6.5 acre island in 1900. Mary Taft, however, is not happy with the deed the way it's written, so she adds a covenant that there's not to be the sale, manufacture, or distribution of alcohol on the island, because she was a pre-prohibitionist. Mr. Bannerman was a Scottish Presbyterian teetotaler. He had no problem with that. And as a matter of fact, I find it ironic that she would not allow alcohol on the island, but she allowed black powder and bombs, and yeah, it's kind of a humorous thing.
Advancing a little further, in 1904, Bannerman bought the underwater rights around the island. Now, unlike a normal person who would have put buoys around the island, not our Mr. Francis, what he did is he sank barges and created a breakwater system that's still there today. If you're a boater, you come out at high tide, you don't see these breakwaters, but they're definitely there underneath, because he would fill them with cement and anything that he wasn't going to sell. So they're solid cement breakwaters. This is the house that the Bannermans finally built at the top of the hill for themselves. This is when it was in its most finished portion. It's a 2-story building. It had two bedrooms and a bathroom on the top floor. And the bathroom, interestingly enough, had running water. They used a cistern to flush the toilets, which I find amazing for back in those days.
This is a really wonderful photo. This is taken from the east side of the river, across the river, and it became the cover of our book, which we wrote with Tom Johnson back in 2006. By God, said that long ago. 2006. And this is the complex, the business complex in its full extent. Mr. Bannerman had to build arsenals to contain all of his goods that were coming over from New York City, up the river. He maintains his office in Manhattan at 501 Broadway, but he brings everything else to up to Palapel Island. And in order to house it all, he builds castle-like structures, Scottish and Belgian in design. And from 1901 into 1910, he has 4 arsenals full of these stocked items. This is an import-export business now going on from Bannerman's Island. There was also built on the island at that time, in the beginning, a house for workers, which was called a lodge, built in about 1915. Eleanor lived in the superintendent's house, and her father was the assistant superintendent, and she'll talk to you about her little house in a little bit. Okay?
Now, being Scottish, he had to have a coat of arms. It's interesting, his family is Irish. Francis Bannerman was the only one in the family who was born in Scotland. His father was in Scotland doing some weaving work, and Francis was born there. So he's the only Scot in his family, but he was always proud of that. So he invented himself a coat of arms. At the top, he always claimed that he was from the MacDonald clan in Scotland. And it's a whole long story. I'm not going to bore you with it today. But this boat, if you see it, it's got wings, which is part of the MacDonald coat of arms. Underneath is the grappling hook that he used to fish out things out of the Brooklyn Harbor. On the bottom is the ordnance pot, which is used today for military goods, and that's the official symbol of that. And on top here is the hand holding the bannerman.
Well, business accelerates for Mr. Bannerman, 1905, 1910, 1915. The catalog is at its full depth, 450 pages sometimes per year, selling all around the world. But in 1918, Mr. Bannerman passes away. He passes away in Brooklyn, New York. That's where his main residence was, at the Hotel Margaret. And he is buried in Brooklyn, New York at the Greenwood Cemetery. Some of you may be heard of it or be familiar with it, very historic cemetery. But the family grinds on. The sons take over the business, 2 sons, along with Mrs. Bannerman, actually, is helpful too. The Bannermans had 4 children. They had 3 sons and a little girl who died from, we believe, scarlet fever at the age of 1. So the 3 sons survived. One became a doctor in Boston. The other 2 went into the family business, as well as being an attorney, I believe. But the business survives. They accelerate the business as much as possible. But in the 1930s, things begin to change because the government outlaws the sale and the purchase of black powder items, and the Bannermans are stuck with a ton of it. They don't know what to do with it. They can't sell it. They can't buy it. They just don't know what to do with it. So for the next 25 years or so, what they do is sell everything from those warehouses that is legal, such as the non-powder items, which is swords and scabbards, helmets, uniforms, canteens, and saddles, leather goods, knapsacks, holsters, you name it. The Bannermans are selling for about 25 years to deplete the inventory in these warehouses. But finally, around the late 1950s, they are pretty much done doing that, and they decide to try to sell the island. Well, that doesn't work out too well because all of this black powder is laying around. Now, you or I would not want to buy an island or buy a castle with it surrounded by black powder items. And so what they do is they have somebody come out, an expert in the field by the name of Val Frechette. Val is off to the left there in that picture in summer of 1959. His job is to decommission the island and take all of the black powder items off the island to make it sellable. Well, Val is out there, and we've seen him give a speech about his experiences on Bannerman's Island, and they are quite extraordinary about what he found in the buildings and what the expectations of being there for a short period of time turned out to be quite lengthy. But in any event, Val finishes his job. Go to the next one. This will just show you, these are just caseloads of ammunition being shipped out one day. He had 2 boats and a crew with him, and this was a daily activity going on.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay, timeout.
This is a picture. I'm sorry, I hurt my knee and I really have to sit down. This is a picture I took many years ago. Unfortunately, when this picture was, fortunately, when this picture was taken, the castle was pretty much intact. Since then, we've had a tragedy. A third of the building collapsed in 2009, and we lost a lot of it. But this was just to show you how picturesque the castle was back in the day, and it still is.
Let me just backtrack a little bit. After the island gets cleaned up of the black powder items, they put it up for sale again, no purchases again, because the buildings are in disrepair, basically. So finally in 1967, it's a long story, but I'll make it short, New York State becomes the owner of Bannerman's Island in 1967. And within 2 years, a tragic fire breaks out at the arsenal end and burns down all the floors and roofs, leaving only the shells remaining. And once you lose your floor and ceiling stability, you lose stability. It's basically what you lose. So the buildings became more and more fragile. Well, the Bannerman Castle Trust, interestingly enough, after a long period of abandonment on the island by New York State, they put up no trespassing signs, but that did very little good to keep the looters off, the vandals off, and the keg parties off, and vice versa. 1993, 1994, Neil Kaplan, over here, one of the founding fathers of the Bannerman Castle Trust, appealed to the state to allow them, as a friends group, to operate Bannerman's Island for them, with their permission. And they did give the permission to us to do what we needed to do to get the island open to the public and to do what we could about restoration with no funding. It was a chore, and it took 93 to 7, about 11 years before the island could be open for tours in order to build a dock, in order to get all the brush cleared, the pads cleared, and what have you. So Neil is over here. He'll perhaps give a little pep talk about that as well. So we started tours. Well, this is one of our tour boats that comes over today. This is the Estuary Steward. And we're running now, I think about 12,000 people a year, Neil, right?
Wow.
Yeah, a little more than that, 12, 13, 14,000 people a year. Wow. Not only do we do guided tours with history-led tours, we do musical plays, we do live music every third Sunday, picnic live tours on every third Sunday. We do movie nights quite often, and if you haven't seen a movie on Bannerman Island, you're really missing something, particularly when you see a movie like Sacco or something like that out there. Which was sure about 3 years ago, right, Neil? 3 or 4 years ago. But it's really a treat to be out there on a Friday evening watching a movie.
Now, one of the things we did out there, one of the first things we did, is we started working on the gardens. And this is just to show you how picturesque, it's okay, to show you how picturesque it is out there. You can see the flowers. Here's another picture. This is the flowers that are by the residence where the Bannermans lived. And you can look downriver from that point and you can see West Point. Now, when we first came out, this building, which was the Bannerman residence, was completely a shell. In fact, there was poison ivy holding the walls up, we believe. There were trees growing in there, all kinds of things. And eventually, this was one of the first projects the Bannerman Castle Trust did, besides opening the island, was to restore this building.
Well, that required putting up a new roof and a new second floor, and stairway, and new subflooring at the ground level. And ever since then, we have continued our work with the residents, and Neil might give you a better idea of what % we are done of doing all the things we want to do, maybe 80% or something like that. But of course, it all amounts to funding, which is sometimes hard to get these days. Okay. This is just another view of the front entrance to the Bannerman residence. This is used by the family and their friends into the 1930s. It was only used during the summertime, mostly in the maybe early fall, in the springtime, because the weather could be pretty nasty, and they didn't have central heat until a little bit later. So yeah, it was pretty much of a summer residence for the Bannermans. Now we have an interpretive center inside the building. It's like a visitor center, and you could walk around and read storyboards and some beautiful photographs and some actually replicas of Bannerman's material that we've accumulated over the years, and you can enjoy your little walk around there. Now this is the outside terrace. We'll be in the Hudson River now, and we'd be looking through that picture window downriver towards West Point. And this terrace was restored totally, how about 3 years ago, Neil?
Yeah, they just finished a section this year.
Oh, a section finished this year, but the basic work was like 3 years ago, wasn't it?
Started about 4 years.
4 years ago. Right. Okay, so now you can lounge out there during your spare time on the island and take in the views and take some photographs. Some of the photographs that you could take out there are just spectacular. Looking down on Storm King Mountain, Breakneck Ridge, we can see West Point in the distance on a clear day. It's really fabulous.
Now, this year, I went too far. Oh, that picture's not there. This is looking at the terrace. I thought there was another picture. This is the terrace, again, looking from the picture window that we now have put back in place in the residence. Now, what we've done, we've worked with West Point cadets 3 times. We've done 3 projects with the engineering group from West Point. The first one was a way of watering our plants. They put tanks in the basement of the building. We would pump water up from the river into these tanks, and from there use gravity to water the plants. The second project we did with them was this bridge. And this bridge went over a little ravine that led to the highest point on the island, where there were 3 flagpoles that Bannerman used to have. And you can see this is the group of cadets and some of the park workers that were out there. The other thing that we did, Wes was talking about, was some of the dinners. This is a dinner. This is, I think, our first Farm Fresh dinner, where we brought out people. And this one, we had actual glass and china that we had to lug up 72 steps. But it was an amazing dinner. And since then, we've had one. Actually, we've had 2 a year every year. And it's been a really great fundraiser for us. And the last picture that I have here is one of the movies. They show it outside on a screen, and it's really quite amazing.
Yeah, well, to finish up, being that Eleanor is going to be a star attraction here, not us, in about 15 minutes or so, we're going to take a little break, but I just wanted to show you, this is the home that Eleanor grew up on Bannerman's Island, and she's going to talk more about the house later. But this was nestled in between the arsenal end, which was loaded with black powder items. And I once asked Eleanor, did it ever bother you? And she said, what? I never even thought about it. You know, on the other side of that wall could have been bombs and cannonballs, and she never bothered her. But she's going to describe her experiences growing up on Bannerman's Island in about 15 minutes. We're going to take a break, folks, so you have a cup of coffee, use the bathrooms and what have you, okay? And I heard there's food. And I heard there's some good food too. Okay, all right, thank you guys, thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Neil Kaplan. I'm the Executive Director and founder of the Bannerman Castle Trust. Thank you so much for your support. And we are really thrilled to have Eleanor Seeland here today. In 1993, I was working to try to convince the parks to change the status of the island from scenic ruin so that we can create a park there that you could go to, that we could do theater, that we could share the history and save the buildings. So during that time, I had the honor to meet Eleanor's mother and father, Wayne Owen and Marion Owen, and they were just wonderful, amazing people. And I know that every time I would go to Marion's house, she was baking about 20 pies, 3 cans, and you couldn't get out of her house without getting something to eat. Oh, honey, take something with you. Okay, so we'd have a zucchini bread or something like that. And when Darlene and I bought our house, it was a mess. It was 6 families, and it had bullet holes, and this is Beacon before the day, and because I'm old now. And so we bought the house, and we had to take all the stoves out. And I said to Marion, I said, what kind of stove do you think we should get? And Wayne said, oh, don't ask her. She wears stoves out. Okay. So the Bannerman Castle Trust has been a labor of love, not only for me, but for all the people involved, especially Barbara and Wes Gottlock and Tom Johnson. And we have amazing people that are there working to give you something really amazing. We still are doing a lot of work there. The buildings where we have to get a study so that we can have a plan on how we're going to save them, because the buildings have a chance of falling down even now. So it takes a lot of money. So donations are always welcome to the Bannerman Castle Trust for those purposes. And you could go online to bannermancastle.org and make a donation if you like. Or you could talk to Wes or to Barbara or myself. But in the meantime, it's so important to keep this structure alive, because it keeps the stories of Eleanor Owen Seeland and Marion and Wayne Owen alive. And we are so thrilled that we can do that. But it takes your help, and we've had a lot of help, and we're so proud. This year we did Nonsense on the Island. We did the Anastasia file about Anna Mannheim, who was supposedly Anastasia. And then we did Dracula. We do Dracula every year because it makes money. So anyway, next year we're tentative doing Always Patsy Cline and Driving Miss Daisy and Dracula again. So, and we have amazing movies. This year we did Jaws. So we did that. And so next year we're working on it. So if you have a favorite movie in mind, let us know. But right now we're going to introduce you to our favorite girl, and that is Eleanor Owen Seeland.
The only thing I can say, that I'm the only person probably here who would hate to be in this particular position that I'm in right now. I'd rather be sitting back there, listening to you. But here I am. What can I say? Yes, I did grow up on the island. I believe I was born in Fostertown, New York. That's where my grandmother lived, and I believe that she was probably responsible for my delivery. However, I don't quite remember. But I do know that my parents were working on Bannerman Island. My dad is a caretaker, and my mom also is a caretaker because she was responsible for working in the gardens and keeping the Bannermans residents ready for occupancy when they came up in the summer. And then, a year later, my brother Leonard came along. So there were two of us, and we were very close. It was another about 4 years before my sister Phyllis came along. She was a redhead, and she was born on the island. And Dr. Frank from Beacon came for the delivery. And it was kind of a rough day with a rowboat. I don't think the doctor was prepared for a rowboat ride to an island. Anyway, the delivery was perfectly normal. My sister was normal, if you can call a redhead, a fiery redhead, normal. But the doctor said he'd never do another delivery on the island, so he was cured. So now there were three of us with my parents, and we lived in the superintendent's house, as Barbara has already said, Wes has already said, which was originally just a square kind of box or a rectangular type of box. But Bannerman, when he gets a hold of something, has to add a little ornate something here or there and so forth and so on. So he added an ornate entranceway and they had a little turret or something. I don't know what the technical thing is for on top of the building. But there we sat, nestled in between two arsenals, one on the north and one on the east, that stole our windows on that side of the house. But it didn't daunt my dad because he turned them into knick-knack shells. Rather strange to see these brick knick-knack shells, but of course it was wood. But it was nice for my mother anyway, and we just didn't have these dark holes in the wall. And we had a cistern just outside of the house. That's where we got our water from. Our water for washing and for scrubbing up on the floors or even washing ourselves or whatever we were doing. But we couldn't drink the water, of course. There was no water source on the island that we could drink. I'm told originally there was a well on the island, but Bannerman, in order to expand the well and so produce more water, apparently dynamited it and killed it. So there was a little tiny swampy area down on the south side of the island with this ornate looking well house there, but very nice little steps going down the little swamp. It was nice. Very nice. But anyway, if we wanted water, my dad had to take these glass jugs and he would have to row over to the shore, dock a rowboat, anyway, tie up a rowboat and go across the railroad tracks. There were 4 at that particular time. Climb up the hill. Halfway up the hill was a spring. And he would get his water there and he'd bring it back to the island and we would have water. What we did in the winter, I don't know. Nobody was going ashore for water in the winter. Besides, it freezed on the way back. But we had water in the winter, so maybe they boiled the snow. I don't know what they did. But anyway, we didn't use the cistern water, which was the rain water. But we had a sink in the kitchen and an old pump handle that pulled up the water for us. Anybody familiar with those pump handles? Okay. So Mom would pull up the water in the morning, and there was a little basin that she'd fill with water. And we would wash our hands or our faces, whatever it was, all day long. But by the time my dad was washing up to the elbows at the end of the day, I don't know how she got the water down in through the sink into the cistern or wherever it was going because it was so filthy. But that's the way it was. But we did have water. We did have water inside there. What can I say? Furthermore, we had electricity, if my dad could get the generator going, which sometimes was tricky because I remember holding the flashlight while he's trying to get this gasoline engine moving so that we're going to have electricity. So if he got it going, we got to listen to the radio and he got to hear the news. And I got to hear, and my brother and I, of course, sister, the Lone Ranger and Tonto. How many of you remember the Lone Ranger and Tonto? Aha! Now, careful, you're giving away your ages. Very careful, very careful. I may ask you some trick questions, so pay attention. But I also listened to Inner Sanctum. Anybody ever hear of Aha, the first person. First person, okay, Inner Sanctum. Oh, that was scary. I remember one story, maybe you'll remember it, who knows. It was a man, he was a gardener. He raised roses, there was a contest, and he wanted to raise the largest roses of all, win the prize. And so he had this special fertilizer that he used on his roses. But it kind of backfired because it didn't produce large roses, it produced large worms. And I knew what worms were because I would gather them to go fishing. So I had these visions of these huge earthworms coming out of the ground, crushing the houses and crushing the people. I couldn't sleep for several nights after that. Do you think I stopped watching the program? I did till next week. Anyway, then I was back to it again. What can I say? But anyway, we did have a radio on occasion, and because we had electricity, we had a washing machine. Yes, I know. Do any of you remember the old Ringer washing machine? Oh, quite a few people here. Okay, I told you, be careful. Don't raise your hands, okay? Be careful. So we had this we had a new Ringer washing machine. Mom would heat the water from the cistern, of course, on the gasoline stove. And she would fill it up and get the wash going and so forth and so on. And I was Mama's big helper, so I got to put the clothes through the wringers, okay? Doesn't sound very difficult, does it? Except if you happen to have long hair, which I had at the time. So my hair would go through the wringers, they'd be winding around, I was getting closer and closer to my work, and I'd be screaming and hollering, Mom would come along and pound that thing on the top, and it'd pop open, and she'd rescue me. I like to say that I learned my lesson the first time, but I would be lying to you. I had a habit of daydreaming. Anyway, so I got caught several times before I finally learned how to put my hair through the wringers. So what can I say? But we had a fireplace in the living room. Thank God we had a fireplace in the living room. Nice big fireplace right there against the edge of the arsenal. Oh, you don't think it's a good idea to have a fire next to that arsenal? Oh, well, that's where it was, right there, right next to the arsenal. There was our fireplace. Anyway, when it was going, it was nice and warm, and in the winter, it was very, very, very cold on the island. And my dad had made this nice little bench that my brother and I could sit on. So we would toast ourselves on one side like marshmallows, and then we turn around and toast ourselves on the other side. That's how we kept ourselves warm, because the big old furnace that we had in the cellar never kept the house up above 60. I don't even know if it made 60, to tell the truth. So it was cold in the house. And at night, my mother would gather up all the coats, everything she could find in the house, and put over us to keep us warm at night in our beds. And I can remember I even slept with my head covered at night. But anyway, I had a secret that I wasn't going to tell anybody else in the family. Anybody hear about these old horsehair mattresses? You did? Oh, some of you. Okay, good. Well, I had old horsehair mattress. Boy, are they coarse and are they hard. But mine was perfect. Mine was perfect because so many people had slept on that mattress, it all separated out in the middle. And guess where I fit? Right in that little hole, so it sort of closed up over me. So I had a little bit more warmth than anybody else in the house. I wasn't going to tell them my secret. And I hope you don't. Oh, dear. It was so cold at night. I didn't realize that until I'm an adult. I remember that there were days when I wakened up in the morning that my water had frozen on my nightstand. That's how cold. And you know what? I didn't even think about it as a child. No, so you didn't drink it. That was all. You know, couldn't get to it. Well, we had a bathroom upstairs in the house, just like the Bannermans. Of course, there was a toilet, and there was a bathtub, there was a sink. We were only missing one thing. Guess what? Water. We didn't have any water unless somebody brought it up. But we would use the bathroom at night as children if we needed to go, which as children you don't usually have to go, except one night I had to go. Well, that's okay. My bedroom is up here, and there's like a hallway that goes along the edge of the stairs with a railing, of course, to keep you from falling down the stairs till you get to the bathroom at the end of the hall, and it's pitch black. We've got no lights at night. You don't run the generator at night. You can't waste money like that, or gas. And so it's pitch black. I don't have any flashlight or anything. My dad's the only one with a flashlight. So I made my way to the bathroom. I found the toilet and I did my business. I stood up, I took a step. I reached out. There was nothing there, absolutely nothing there. And all I could think of is, what if I fall down those steps in the dark? I don't know where the steps is. I don't know where north, south, east, or west is. I was scared. I was so scared, I started hollering and I started yelling, which wakened my dad and probably every person else in the household. I don't know. But my dad got up and he had a flashlight. So my hero came and rescued me and walked me back to my bed. You know, he didn't say a word. He didn't say a word. He just took me back to my bed and I went back to sleep. Happy as a lark. But you know, the next day my problems were all solved. Guess what was under the edge of my bed? This nice little potty. It's perfect. Perfect, 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 perfect. So I was all set. What can I say? Oh, dear. All right. We had, as I told you, we had this little, I think she's got a picture of it, this little ornate entranceway to the house. And then that little ornate entranceway was an ice box. Anybody ever seen an ice box? It looks like this one looked like a little brown bureau. And that's all I was. It was a box standing on these little legs here. Dad would open the top, put a piece of ice in there, and we were all set in the summertime. Well, this one particular day, there was nobody in the house but me. And I was going out somewhere, I don't know where I was going, but when I got near to the icebox, I saw there was a great big bottle of soda sitting there. And it was opened. Now, soda is a rarity on the island, and we would get one bottle and have to share it with everybody, you know. So it was open. There wasn't anybody there for me to ask. I mean, what would you do in those circumstances? So I decided that I would just have a sip. Just a sip. Nobody miss a sip, right? Except it was gasoline or kerosene. Oh, I was a very sick little girl after that. And I imagine imagined I was going to be hurting on the other end soon, too, for disobedience. But I didn't get lashed. My daddy got tongue lashed. And you know what? I never had that temptation again after that. Matter taken care of. What can I say? God is so good. What can I say? I guess I should tell you some of the school stories. Now, you know what? I never even thought about it. Everybody has to go to school. There was no homeschooling back then. So everybody had to go to school, even if you lived on an island, completely surrounded by water, sometimes surrounded by ice, and sometimes the heavy wind and storms and all the rest. So, come 6 years old, it's time for me to go to school. Well, my dad had to row me across, and later my brother row us across, take us over to the train tracks. We cross the tracks, we climb up the hill, get in the car, and he'd drive us up to Dutchess Junction School, which is partway between Cold Spring and Beacon, or at least the island and Beacon. And to me, it was a very large school. Remember, it came from this little box house anyway. So this is a big school. It's got 2 rooms in it. It's got 2 large rooms in it. It's got 2 teachers. One teaches grade 1 through 4. The other teaches grade 5 through 8. And at one time, there were only 8 children in the school. So I call it my public-private education. And believe me, it was very good, because while I'm listening there to grade 1, I'm hearing grade 2, I'm hearing grade 3, I'm hearing grade 4. So by the time you get into those grades, you could be teaching the classes by then. I'm not quite sure. Anyway, it was a wonderful school. Now, sometimes my dad wasn't able to come and pick us up after school. You know, sometimes he had to work. And so my brother and I would have to walk. You know, my brother doesn't know what that word means, or he didn't back then. Walk? He couldn't walk. He could only run. He would trot back. It was a mile or 2. I don't know exactly. I'll time it sometime. But he would run back to where the boat was docked. And of course, I'd have to run too, because I'm big sister. Guess who's responsible for little brother? I am. So I run back with him. Well, this particular time, my dad had walked us over on the ice from the island to the shore. And we were told to wait at the dock until my mother came to walk us back to the island. Do you think he stopped his rhythm when he got to the ice? He did not. He jumped out on the ice and continued as fast as he could for the island. Well, that's okay, except for one thing. The ice in the harbor rises and falls at a different rate than the water outside the harbor, where the tide is moving, rises and falls. So it shears off between the twin towers that we have to go through to get into the harbor, to get to the island. Well, that's okay if you know about that, because you can jump over that space. Well, I'm running behind my brother, and I'm hauling, wait for Mom. She's hauling on the other end. He doesn't realize, what's happening here. He gets to that spot. Now, if there looks like there's ice there. You got about 1 inch of ice there, okay? It freezes over, but it keeps breaking off. And he steps in that area, and down he goes into that ice water, and by the grace of God, I was close to him. I was able to grab him and pull out. And to this day, I will tell you, God had to stop his fall because he should have been under the ice on one side of the other, falling straight down through there. But by the grace of God, I was able to get him out. And I remember now, which I didn't remember at the time, he weighed almost as much as I did too. That was physically impossible for me. So it had to be a miracle. Anyway, there was nothing that was going to save him from my mother, though. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. She was there by that time, and she stopped her crying and her yelling, and now she was after him. And she didn't even notice me, the hero, and she grabbed a hold of him, and she took him on and up to the house. But you know what? He never did it again. And I'm so glad. He might have been so fortunate a second time. What can I say? Let me just take a sip here. You want me to grab it? If I can get a hold of it. Okay. Here you go. Okay, thank you. My dad and the other caretaker on the island, they made this boat, very special boat, to help us to get back and forth across the ice or the water or whatever it was so we could go to school. It was, instead of having the rounded off bows like boats usually have, it was squared off on both ends and had runners on the bottom. Now, the way this boat was used was that the ice, the water would be open outside of the harbor, okay? But it would freeze in the harbor because it was quiet in there. And so we would get a little ice in the harbor, maybe just a couple inches, but you can't row through a couple inches of ice very well. So with this particular ice boat, what my dad would do is he would get in the boat, my brother would get in, I would get in, and he had a pike pole, which is a long pole with a hook on the end. And he would throw that out in front of the boat, and he'd pull the boat up on the ice until the ice broke. And then we'd be sitting in the water. Then he'd throw it out again, and he'd pull it again, and we'd go a few feet, a few feet, a few feet, until we got to the open water. And then he'd break out the oars, and we would always over to the shore. Sound like fun? Yeah, well, I never thought about it too much, but I realize now that, wow, this is tough, really tough. And then there was a day, it was Valentine's Day, and we were very excited at the school because we had made stacks of homemade valentines for our friends and things, and we were going to have a party. Now, parties were rare things. That meant cookies, maybe cake or something to drink, maybe even a candy or something of the sort. Plus, we'd get these valentines exchanged. So it was a very, very exciting day to go to school. And at the end of the day, which was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it was really getting dark out there, even though it wasn't time for it to get dark. And my dad did come with a car. We got in the car, and no sooner did we get in the car, a blizzard started. And it was a blizzard, and it was heavy. And it was getting darker and darker and darker. By the time we got back to the dock to take the boat and cross to the island, we come out on open water. I saw something that I had never seen before in my whole life. The snow was landing on the water. It was actually moving up and down with the wind. There was a heavy wind that day. It was cold. It was very cold, but it was very beautiful, very beautiful. So my dad, he takes the oars and he dips the oars in the water. Wait a minute, we're rowing the wrong way? We're rowing the right way, okay. He dips the oars in the water, takes 2 or 3 dips, pulls them out of the water. They're caked with snow. You can't lift them anymore. So he has to knock them off on the edge of the boat. And then he dips in and takes 2 or 3 more dips. Same thing. So that's okay, it's cold, it's windy, it's getting dark. Of course, there's no lights on a rowboat, and of course, there's no other boats out there on the river. We got about halfway between the dock and the island entrance, and I realized we were not going to make the entrance to the island. We were not going to get into the harbor. We were going to go below the island, and then we would be at the mercy of the storm and the mercy of the wind. Well, when I realized that, I immediately helped my dad out by crying and carrying on. Oh yeah, I could be counted on, you know that? Make sure you take me if you have any problems, okay? So, well, no, I really did help him, because when I looked at him carefully, he had icicles hanging off his eyebrows and off his nose, because he was sweating in that cold and in that wind, because he knew the danger more than I had ever realized it. And of course, he was silent. I wasn't. We did. We missed the island. We missed the island. We came over and we were south of the island. But by the grace of God, we were then in the lee of the island, which means we were protected from the wind and we were protected from the tide pulling us southward. So then my dad could make some leeway, even though he had to go through the same procedure, same icicles. We did get out to the lower edge of the harbor where the other caretaker and my mother were there, and she grabbed us up. They grabbed us up, got us in the boat, took us over. We had to change our clothes and everything of the sort. Put us in front of that wonderful fire with a blanket. And then the most wonderful thing of all happened. She served the best hot chocolate I have ever had in my whole life. And I would recommend it to you, but I don't recommend the experience at all, okay? Okay, that was a absolutely true story. I'm sorry to say, but it is a true story. There were many experiences with boats on the island. I remember my sister Phyllis, my fiery little redheaded sister. I don't know whether she was 2 or 3 years old, but apparently we had taken the larger boat and we had gone over to Cornwall, which was exactly west of the island for some reason. I don't know why, but anyway, it was low tide, and we came back and we pulled into the harbor, and my dad was docking the boat. And because it was low tide, the dock level was up here, and the top of the boat, or the deck of the boat, was down below. So there was quite a step to get up onto the dock itself. Well, my fiery little sister decided that she would jump out of the boat up onto the shore there, but she missed. And she went down between the boat and the dock. And the boat is moving from its own waves when it's docking there. And of course the water is low, but it's still over her head, for the boats there, let's face it. So my dad immediately jumped into the water and rescued her. Fortunately, she too did not pull that trick again. I'm glad for her sake anyway, but I'll tell you another tale about my sister. Don't repeat this one, okay? Okay, listen carefully, but don't repeat it. We had taken a different boat. This boat had a motor inside of it, and I guess we probably had taken my dad over to Cornwall and dropped him off. I don't know why we went to Cornwall, but anyway, we were coming back, and my mother's in charge, and my sister and brother in the boat, as well as myself. And just before we got to the island, the engine died on the boat. Well, my dad is not there. There are no oars in the boat. It's daytime. Of course, we could float out there for a while till somebody saw us and rescue us, but I wasn't too interested in that, to tell the truth. But anyway, my mother's hollering at my sister she's saying to my sister, give me your underpants. Well, my sister only has underpants on. She's little, she's real little. She only has her little underpants on. She says, give me your underpants. No. And she says, give me your underpants. No. So she took a hold of her and took off her underpants, and she moved a part off of the motor there and did something with it and put it back on again, and we took off. But you know what? My sister kept right on complaining for quite a while, but none of us paid too much attention to her. Now, don't tell that story to anybody. If it gets back to her relatives, I'll probably be in some kind of trouble. What can I say? But anyway, my brother and I used to spend a lot of time swimming. The Bannermans had made a little area on the north side of the island where they had put in extra sand to cover up the mud that was down in there. And they had built a retaining wall, and behind the retaining wall they had put in dirt, and they had grass there. It's kind of nice. So you had to kind of get yourself down the wall, and then you could use the swimming area that was there, and Leonard and I would spend a lot of time there. And one day, of course, we didn't have permission to do this. Occasionally we did things without permission. But you're not going to tell anybody, I know that, so it's okay. Besides, my brother is no longer alive, so I guess we're safe. So we're down there and we're skinny dipping. We're having a great time in the water there, and the West Pointers come up with their canoe. Oh, wow. So we were sitting in the water with the water up to our chins there, talking to the West Pointers. They always had a lot of questions for us. Whether we can answer them, I don't know. But anyway, I didn't realize until a short time ago that water at that time was crystal clear. I'm so glad I didn't know at the time. And of course, it was one of those things we neglected to say to our parents at the time. Oh, and yeah, there was another one we neglected to say too. We were told not to swim at high tide. Well, if the dayliners were going through, and the dayliners were coming through, at that time there were 3 dayliners. I don't know whether anybody knows. There's Peter Stuyvesant, and which was a little one. Alexander Hamilton. And the Robert Fulton. Yeah.
Was it Mary Powell too?
No, I don't remember any Mary Powell. I remember the other. I remember the other 3. Robert Fulton had 3 smokestacks, and the Alexander Hamilton had 2, and Peter Stuyvesant was the smallest one with 1. But the important thing was that they made these wonderful waves so that we could swim over the waves, and we would enjoy that very, very much. But we were told never to go down there and swim over those waves when it was high tide, when the water came up against the wall. It would come up about 2 feet high on the wall. Well, this day we were out there swimming, we decided, we'll just stay. Well, when the water came against the wall, it created an undertow. So my brother and I are being pulled back and forth over the sand, and we're about to be drowned. Now we know why. We're told not to do that. But by the grace of God, I was able to get him up, boost him up, and get him up off the wall and get him out there. How I got out, I don't know. But we got out, but we forgot to mention to our parents why our legs were so ripped up and so forth. It was just an oversight on our part, Those things happen. What can I say? Oh, dear. Well, on the island, there really weren't any animals like rabbits. Well, they're birds. Rabbits or squirrels or woodchuck or anything of that. There weren't any snakes, except my mother found a snake one day in the kitchen she thought it was a little shoelace laying on the floor. She bent over and picked it up and found out, and it was a live shoelace. But she thinks it was probably a sand snake that had come in with the sand they brought in for mixing the cement, making concrete. So, but there were dogs, because they had dogs kind of let us know when there was somebody who was trying to get on the island. And of course there was a cat. And then at one time or 2 or 3 times, there was a pig. A pig was for munching on. And you know what? He couldn't get away either. So he had the free run of the island. Not that there's much to munch on the rocks. So he didn't go too far anyway. But my dad used to go up to Beacon, New York, to the 5 and 10 cent store. And he used to get day-old cookies. Get these great big boxes of day-old cookies. I remember there's some with marshmallow on the top and chocolate. You know what? I'm not quite sure who ate more of those cookies. Whether I did or the pig did. But anyway, the pig got fat, I didn't. And it was the pig that we ate in the fall, not me. So I was always glad for that. What can I say? Okay. I know the other caretaker did say at one time that a deer had swam over to the island, but I guess he didn't like it there because he didn't stay at all. Now one, I don't know whether it was fall or whether it was a spring morning, I got up early, maybe for a change, I don't know. But anyway, the temperature was changing outside. And I decided that I would walk up to the Bannerman's residence on the top of the hill so I could look down toward West Point just to enjoy the view. And when I got up there and I looked down toward West Point, I saw that there was a fog rising up off of the river. Now, it wasn't very high, just raised up maybe 10 feet, 12 feet off the water, but it was rising. It was very, very beautiful. And as I looking at it and enjoying it, there are flames coming up through the fog. Flames on the water? So I rubbed my eyes, I looked again. Yes, there were flames on the water. Furthermore, those flames were moving toward my right. So there definitely were flames there. So I ran to another higher place on the island toward the north, and sure enough, the flames were moving along the edge of the island. So I had to see this, So I ran down past the superintendent's house, past where we lived, hollering all the way, "Fire on the water! Fire on the water!" And I ran down to the harbor area, and I looked over toward the north breakwater, and sure enough, there were flames moving along the breakwater. Well, on the breakwater, I could really get close to see the water. So I ran out on the breakwater, and I got out right to where the flames were, and I looked out, and yes, it would look like they were they looked like railroad ties to me, except they weren't creosoted, and they were all had these huge spikes in them, fastened them together, but they were burning. They were just a few of them, maybe this wide, maybe this long. This is all, woohoo! This is all that I saw. And as soon as I got to see it, the spikes pulled it under the water and it was gone. Well, by that time my family had reached me. There was no fire on the water. And occasionally I had told a tall tale. Occasionally, only occasionally, of course. I remember there was one, I wish my mother would have forgotten it, but I told her the tale the day that I caught the fish, and it was a flying fish, and it flew way up by the windows on the lodge where the men lived. Yeah. So maybe they were suspicious about my vision. But anyway, the next day, my dad got the newspaper, and he was reading the newspaper, and he said there were some grain barges that caught fire off the edge of Newburgh in the river there, and that they had burned all night and burned out. So guess what? I was vindicated. And not with my fish story. I wasn't vindicated there at all. What can I say? And how many of you have been to West Point? Okay. Did you go to the park and see those great big huge cannon that they have sitting there? Okay. Well, of course, they were sitting all over the island. They were out along the breakwaters. They were here. They were there, all over the place. But there were 3 of them that were side by side, jumping space apart, right near the dock. And my brother and I would play there, and we were either riding horses, or we were shooting on our enemies, or whatever it was. But we were busy. There were some briars growing up around the cannon, and there was some junk laying around there too, but that didn't bother us. We were up on the cannon, so we jumped from cannon to cannon. Well, this day I was jumping from cannon to cannon, and I missed. I fell down between them, and when I did, I ripped my leg open. Well, I ripped it open about that far, a good inch. The sew section came out of there, and I was bleeding like a stuck pig. My brother ran for my mother because my dad was not there at that particular time. And she came, and she was more than upset, what can I say, hysterical, but she did the right thing. She took off her slip, tore it into pieces, made a tourniquet for my leg because the blood was gushing out of my leg. And she set me in a shady place by one of the arsenals. And then she ran for the phone because my dad was not there. He was in Newburgh making a delivery. By the grace of God, she was able to get a hold of him. And he came as quickly as he could. But it was a good hour or more that took him to get back. But I don't know, it was just the grace of God because my leg didn't really hurt. It should have, but it didn't really hurt. So when he got there, of course, he picked me up, he carried me over, he put me in the boat, he rowed to the shore, carried me up the hill, put me in the car, and the doctor, Franken Beacon, had already been alerted, so he was ready for us. At least we thought he was ready for us. When we got there, some other kid beat me to him. There was some other kid in the office screaming his lungs out. Well, that didn't help me too much at all. But you know what? When I got in there and the doctor started pulling out the rust from the corrugated metal that tore my leg, you could hear me screaming in the next county too. And my dad was trying to hold me still. The doctor was trying to work, and nothing was working very well at all. But he did the best he could. And when he sewed it like up in a pile. I don't know what to tell you, but that was sewed to cover that gap in there, as it healed. It looked horrible. It had its advantage, though. I got to sleep in Mom and Dad's bed for a couple of nights, so that was nice. But to be perfectly honest, I don't know what that man put on that rusty area, but I never got an infection. I never got an infection. That is a miracle right there. And there was rust working its way out of my leg until I was about 50 years old. So I had a nice collection of rust in my leg. Huh? And I don't show it to too many people. I kind of keep it under wraps. What can I say? Oh, dear. God is good. He's good.
This was a lovely story. I need to be excused, though I have to
Okay.
Eleanor, can you remember anything about harvesting ice?
Yes. I know that there was an ice house on the island, okay? And I know there are blocks of ice, and there are nice big blocks of ice like this, and they all had straw on them to keep them from melting together. Otherwise, in the summer, we would have had one large ice cube out there in the ice house. But the ice had to freeze. I never saw them harvest it. Never. I guess I was in the house at that time. But the ice was like this. And I know the ice froze very deeply. And occasionally it would freeze perfectly clear. And it was perfectly clear. It was scary because it looked like you're stepping out on the water. And actually, it's really very thick ice. But usually it would freeze with some air caught in it, I guess. And they'd have the white spots, so it wouldn't be so scary to step out on and so forth and so on. But I know they actually could walk from the island to Newburgh in the winter sometimes, okay? Now, I never did that, but Frank Crawford did, who was also a caretaker on the island. But I know that my dad and his friend took a motorcycle out on the ice, okay? And they were fooling around with it, but they took it outside of the harbor, and just north of the harbor, it fell in, and they never did retrieve it. They never did retrieve it. I don't know who.
Was it a Crawford?
Hey, I don't know whether it was a Crawford or not. Sounds like a Crawford trip. I couldn't tell you. I really don't know. And I also then know that they had made themselves a surfboard, and it was just a surfboard with a rope on it. It didn't have any balance or anything of that sort. And I remember watching them. They would have. Does everybody know what a surfboard is? Yes. Okay. It's just a board that they pull behind a boat. So they were in the harbor, and these guys were trying to get up on the surfboard. They could never stay up for any period of time. But they would try and try and try, and that would happen. Yeah, it was recreational for them. And my mother, she was a fisherman. She liked to fish. She liked fish, period. Oh, I remember when Mother went fishing, if she would catch an eel, okay? Anybody ever catch an eel? It will twist up your line so that you cannot save your line or your hook or anything else. Well, she had a cure for that. She would just take that line of hers and she would whack that eel on the cement until it was senseless. And when it was senseless, you had to work really quick and get your hook out of there if you wanted your hook and your slimy old line that you wanted to get out of there. And if it was a good-sized eel, it went in the frying pan. And if it was a little tiny eel, it was allowed to wiggle its way back into the river. But I remember in fishing season in the spring, my dad would go out with a group of men shad fishing, and they would catch a lot of fish at night. And if they allowed an eel to stay in one of those fishes overnight, it would mutilate the fishes because it would take a bite here and take a bite here and take a bite there, and they would lose fish. So they'd always, and believe me, the eel could get this big around. You weren't pulling an eel in like that on your fish line, that was for sure, but these were in the nets. So they'd have to get the eels out, and in the morning they would take the fishes to New York City and sell them there on the market. That was one way of getting some extra income.
That was Nick Lapis.
That was Nick Lapis and his brother, yes. Mm-hmm.
Your grandma loved the roe.
Yes. She loved the roe. I liked the roe of the fishes too. That was one thing. Jerry, during the, I don't know, that month or so, or whatever that time was they were fishing, we had fish every day. And which is nice at the beginning, but it's kind of you know what? I still don't like fish. Honest to God, I have trouble getting it past my nose. I'll eat it, but enjoy it? No. Oh, and also, in the spring, ducks would come, and there'd be flocks of ducks that would come at light on the water. And my dad would go out, and he would shoot some of the ducks, and then we'd have duck to eat, which was very good, but the buckshot was a little hard on your teeth. It was one of the hazards, what can I say? So you had to be careful of that. But we did have a garden on the island, and my dad would raise vegetables and things. And there was a very large cherry tree there. I thought it was an oxheart cherry tree. My sister says it was bitter cherries. I don't know, that's a big difference. But anyway, we did have a cherry tree there on the island, and of course Mother would can the cherries. We would gather them, and so you'd have to pop all of the pits out of the cherries so that you could can them, but delicious in the winter. Absolutely delicious in the winter. Sometimes my mother wanted to get rid of us, I think. No, I mean, that's my conclusion. She wanted to get rid of my brother and I. She would send us out to pick a quart of huckleberries. Have you ever seen huckleberries? They're tiny, tiny, tiny. They're shrunken blueberries. That's what huckleberries are, shrunken blueberries. They're very good, and they were growing on between the rocks on the island. So we would go out there and we would pick the blueberries, and Mom would make for us a roly-poly pudding. Do you know what a roly-poly pudding is? No. Well, I don't think anybody else does either, but anyway. I guess that she made like a biscuit dough up, and maybe she had a little sugar to it, and she would put the berries inside of this biscuit dough, roll it up there. Then she would put it in a piece of cloth and pin it tight, and she'd drop it in a pot of boiling water, and she could cook it that way. It came out very unique that way, but it was good. She would serve it with hard sauce, which is, I don't know, sugar and butter kind of mixture, a little vanilla in there. It was very delicious, but it was unique, very unique. What can I say? You know, Mother was a hero at times, because one time it was kind of a dark day, and the wind was high, and the waves were high on the river. And my mother was looking out over the water. My dad wasn't there. And there was a rowboat floundering out there with 2 men in it. But obviously, they didn't know how to handle a rowboat because the water was coming over the edge of the boat. They didn't have the bow into the waves or anything of that sort. They were floundering. So she got into the motorboat, and she went out and she rescued them. And she found out that they were workers working in the shipyard in Newburgh, and they were putting in pilings, which are telephone poles as far as I'm concerned, to make a dock, okay? And one of them had gotten away. So they sent these men out, inexperienced men, in that kind of weather to rescue it because it was dangerous for the other boats and things in the water. If they didn't see it, they would ram into it. So she rescued them. I don't know who rescued the pole, but may still be there for all I know. So, do you have any questions? Anything you'd like to ask me? Or Barbara, did I miss it?
I was going to say, why don't you tell them what you did in the winter?
Oh, we did in the winter?
The winter, we have a picture. Oh,
You got
a picture of that.
pictures of the ice skating?
Of ice skating, yes.
Ice skating? Yeah, we did. We did go ice skating. We had the little ice skates that have 4 little runners on them, you know, so you couldn't possibly fall. And also adjust it, and they went on your shoes. So we would go out with my dad and my mom, and he would clear some snow off of the harbor, and we would ice skate in there and enjoy ourselves in that particular way.
How old were you when you moved off the island?
I think I was about 11 years old, because it was what happened was my dad was going to be drafted, which means my mother would have to take us to school, okay? So he was going to be drafted, so what he did was he volunteered for the Merchant Marine rather than going into the Army and so forth. So he was gone for 2 years. And so we had to move off the island when my dad went into service, because no way Mom could, get us back and forth to school and so forth and so on. So then we moved to Wappingers Falls. They had bought a house much, much earlier in Wappingers Falls, and they had tried to live there, but they couldn't afford it on what he made at the island. So they were forced to move back to the island, and then they rented that house. So now they just took over the house that they already were working on paying a mortgage on, and that's how we moved off the island. However, we didn't stay away from the island. My mother continued to go and work for the superintendent who was there, cleaning his house, working on the flower beds, whatever was needed to earn some money while my dad was off in service, So my sister would go back, and her friends would go back with her and so forth. So.
It wasn't quite an adjustment from living on an island to living in Wappingers.
Oh, it was a shocker. It was a shocker, yeah. I found out what the real world was all right. You live on an island, you got a mother and father who love you and take care of you and look after you. You get into the real world where there are people who swear and call you names and steal and lie, yeah. It was a shocker. Yeah, I was called naive until I was about, then they stopped calling me that, fortunately, even though they still thought it, I don't know. Probably in my 30s, who knows? Oh, dear, fucking. Somebody has a question.
I don't know if you know,
Vinny?
maybe somebody, there's a rumor that they used rifle barrels for rebar when they were pouring the cement for the castle.
For the houses? I don't know.
I had so many barrels.
You talking about on the island?
I don't know.
Are you talking about on the island?
Yeah.
He used anything he could.
Yeah, Neville.
Bannerman was thrifty.
Thrifty,
And
yeah.
if he didn't, if it was metal and he couldn't sell it, it went into the buildings of the car.
Yeah.
So you might find a rifle,
Bed springs.
you
Scabbards.
might find that there was 1903 rod bayonets, which looked like little Phillips screwdrivers with 3.
Thank you, I
instead of
couldn't reach
4.
it.
And they used them to put up the round finial balls all over the place, which the Bannerman family and some of the workers called them cannonball designs that he had all over the place. So they used it everywhere. There was bed frames, Victorian bed frames in the sidewalks that he used. And there's a story about the bed frames that it came, and some of these are just stories. You have to put that in mind, especially if Charlie Crawford said anything. But God bless Charlie, he's a lovely man. But the bed frame, in fact, I think it's Charlie who told me this, that it came from an insane asylum from Peekskill. So they put him in, they just laid him to rest in the concrete.
Laid him to rest in the. All right.
Eleanor, what years did you live there?
I lived there. I was born in 1932, and I either left at probably about 1943. Okay. All right. I have a request for a story. I'm going to do both of the piano stories. One Christmas was very exciting on the island because, there weren't many special things, additional things, and so. Now, believe me, we weren't poor. Nobody ever told us we were poor, so we weren't poor. We wore hand-me-downs, and at Christmas time, my dad would repaint, or my mother would redress a doll, scrub it up, whatever was necessary, make things look perky and new. But nobody ever told us we were poor, so I was never poor. Okay, somebody would have to tell me that, and I had nothing to gauge it by, okay? But come Christmas time, as I say, my dad, would paint up a sleigh or polish up a bicycle, tricycle, paint it up. My mom would dress the dolls and so forth and so on, and it was a very special time. We put up our stockings, and believe me, they weren't fancy stockings. They were one of Dad's socks. What can I say? They were stockings, okay? And we would each put those up, and in the morning there'd be some ribbon candy in there. You know what a ribbon candy is? Okay? Ribbon candy, yeah, and maybe a hard candy or two, and a nut. There'd be a nut or two in the shell. Okay, and there was and a tangerine or an orange, and it was very nice, very nice. But there were 2 or 3 gifts under the tree, and as I say, they were always very, very special to us. There was a tree; you could smell the pine in the house. We never saw the tree ahead of time. They always set it up. No, excuse me. Santa Claus always set it up. Okay, while we were sleeping, and put the strings of paper loops on there, and popcorn, and and tinsel. The tree was buried in tinsel, and there were some balls on there too and things. It was really very, very beautiful. But all of those things were done behind our back. My dad had to go over to the shore and climb the mountain and get a tree, for us. And so it was a very special time. Well, this one particular Christmas, I got the best gift I ever had. And it happened to be, well, let me give you this, and you can just hold on to it. Okay, thank you. Don't drink out of it. And it just happened to be a toy piano. It's about that big, I guess a little longer than wide. Had 8 little keys on it, and they tinkle, 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 twinkle, twinkle, little star. And there was a music book, and that had numbers in it, and there were numbers on the keys. It was a treasure. It was a treasure. It was a treasure. There was only one problem with it. My brother liked it too. My mother said I had to share. So that meant I had to share. But this one particular day, it was my turn to use it, and he wouldn't give it up. He wouldn't give it up, so I'm pulling on, he's pulling on. It tore. It just shredded my whole world. It took me years to forgive my brother. Years. And you know what? He never apologized. And my brother was a pastor.
Eleanor, I'm afraid we have to.
Okay, one more story.
Eleanor, before you start your one more story, I just want to say you are awesome and we love you. Oh, yes. But unfortunately, I have to leave.
Okay.
So I just want to say this was a blessing. Thank you all, and we love this.
Okay.
And just God be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Okay. All right. I'll just finish with this story that Wes asked for. Is that what you want?
Yeah.
Okay. This story is that I was just passing by an open door on one of the castles, and there was an old piano in there, an upright piano. Now, I never saw a piano any place on the island, not in the Bannerman's residence, and not down in the area where Frank Crawford lived. I don't know where it came from. All of a sudden, there's an old piano in there. It's dark. It's damp in there. I don't know how long it's been sitting there, but not too long, I don't think. I would have spotted it sooner. So of course, I immediately went in and played a concert or two, you know? Can you imagine how it sounded? Oh, no, well, you don't need lessons when you're young. What do you need lessons for? Oh, so I just played in my heart's content, and I would go there several times a day to practice. You know, you need a little practice if you're playing like concerts like that and so on. And one day it was gone. Just the way it appeared, it disappeared. I have no idea who put it there. I have no idea who took it away. But it was gone. Okay, so it's time for me to close. Now, there's just one thing I want to say to you in closing, unless you have something I want to say. Okay, you've listened to my story, right? All right, I'm going to tell you that every single one of you have a story to tell. You have a story to tell. You need to tell your stories. You need to tell it to your family, to your friends, to your neighbors, whomever will listen, because it's part of a relationship. It's part of being human. It's part of expressing yourself. It's part of your history. It's a part of a lot of things that our society at this particular time is trying to destroy. So I just want all of you, wherever you have a chance, to share your stories. And thank you for being so wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen, very, very much. We really appreciate you being here. It's always a joy to hear you speak and to tell your stories. And every time I learn something new that I haven't heard before. So, why don't you give her some, come on.
Hi, I get the privilege and the honor to give you these flowers from the church.